Hi there. I'm here today to talk about a significant challenge and opportunity that's facing all institutions around the world. And how we address that challenge and opportunity is going to determine who thrives and grows, and on the other side, who is increasingly marginalized and under growing pressure. So it's a big topic. It's the challenge that I want to focus on. Let me start with the challenge, is the significant erosion of trust in all of our institutions around the world. This has been going on for years, decades actually. And it's remarkable how widespread it is and how sustained it is. And the erosion is continuing. There is no sign of it slowing down or going away. So I think it's interesting when I talk about the erosion of trust and the surveys that have been done on this, you know, everyone kind of nods their head and says, yes, I've seen those surveys. I know trust is eroding. But it's interesting that while they acknowledge the erosion of trust, there's really very little discussion of the causes. Why is trust eroding? And more importantly, what can we do about it? How can we rebuild trust? So I think it's a significant challenge for all of us. And by the way, when I talk about institutions here, everything I have to say applies to all institutions, not just companies, but governments, universities, NGOs, all institutions are facing this challenge of erosion of trust. But in the talk here, I'm going to spend more of my time on business, the business issues and business challenge. But please, as I talk, remember that everything I say can apply to all institutions, not just businesses and companies. So I think just to put it in a more positive spin, there's a challenge here, but on the other side, there's a very big untapped opportunity to have much more impact. If we can figure out how to reverse that erosion of trust and rebuild the trust, we'll be able to accomplish many things that I'll talk about in the course of this presentation. But first, let me focus on the need to understand the underlying cause of the erosion of trust. Why is trust eroding? Why has it been eroding around the world for so many years? And I've come to believe, based on the research that I've done, that the key reason for erosion of trust is that it's been driven by an institutional model that we have adopted in all of our institutions. Again, not just companies, not just businesses, all of our institutions have adopted an institutional model that I call scalable efficiency. And in that model, the key is to be successful, you need to become more and more efficient at scale. That's the key to success. And to acknowledge, for a century at least, the growth of large institutions around the world and successful institutions has been driven by this model of scalable efficiency. So it worked and yielded incredible results for a long period of time. But here's one of the challenges with scalable efficiency. It focuses you inward in your institution. Efficiency is all about what you do in your institution and how to do it faster and cheaper. It's all about efficiency of operations. And at a higher level even, it's also about the design and deployment of standardized mass market products and services. The best way to be efficient is to have a few products and services that are taken by everyone. not to have lots of different kinds of products and services. And it was shaped by what I call the industrial bargain that I believe has driven our economy again for over a century. And the industrial bargain basically said, look, if you want affordable products and services, we can deliver them to you. But in order for them to be affordable, they have to be mass market standardized products and services that we can efficiently produce and deliver. And for over a century, we accepted that bargain. It helped again to drive the growth of large companies around the world and large institutions in general. So I think while a lot of success in the past, there's a need to understand that the world is changing. And that as the world changes, that scalable efficiency model is becoming more and more dysfunctional. It will lead to less and less success over time. And to put this into context, I've done a lot of research now around the long-term forces that are reshaping the global economy. I call it the big shift. And I believe we are in the early stages of a massive transformation of our global economy and society. So significant change already, but still very early stages. And it's driven by many forces. I will say one force, I'm from Silicon Valley, and clearly you would expect me to say this, but one of the forces is the growth of digital technology and digital technology infrastructures around the world. That is creating a very different context and environment than we've had in the past. So what's happening in this big shift? Well, there are many things, but I think one of the key things here, relevant here, is that in this big shift, we as customers are becoming more and more powerful. We have access to much more information about more options anywhere in the world, and we have the ability to switch from one product or service to another one very easily if our needs are not being met. And not only are we becoming more powerful, but we're becoming more demanding. We as customers are increasingly challenging that industrial bargain and saying, no, I don't want a standardized mass market product or service. I want something that's tailored to my specific needs right now, and that will evolve with my needs as my needs evolve. Now, we started to see this play out in the digital world in terms of things like music, video, software applications, more and more fragmentation and targeting to very narrow niches of customers or audiences to meet their individual needs. Now it's starting to spread into physical products and services. My favorite example is chocolate. It used to be standardized mass market product. There were a few global brands, and if you wanted chocolate, you could get it from those brands, but there wasn't a lot of choice. Now, the whole industry of craft chocolate is emerging, where small targeted enterprises are emerging to deliver chocolate with very specific kinds of flavors in very specific ways to very narrow segments of the customer base. So I think it's an interesting shift, big shift here, away from standardized mass market products to much more tailored, individualized products. That's challenging to that scalable efficiency model. Also challenging is the scalable efficiency model is actually becoming increasingly inefficient. There's a paradox here. As the world rapidly changes and unexpected situations emerge, those standardized processes, those efficient processes that we defined in advance that everybody had to follow in the company, is now being challenged. Workers are confronted with unexpected situations that the process manual can't handle, didn't anticipate. What do I do? And there's an inefficient scrambling at the last minute to try to figure out how to address this unforeseen situation. And I will say that in the big shift world, we are in a world of mounting performance pressure. Competition is intensifying, pace of change accelerating, and unexpected events coming in out of nowhere to disrupt our best laid plans and activities. And in that world of mounting performance pressure, that scalable efficiency model has one big limitation. It is a diminishing returns approach to operations and business. The more efficient you become, the longer and harder you have to work to get to that next increment of efficiency. So that's very challenging in a world of mounting performance pressure. And then I think there's just tying it back to this issue of loss of trust. I think that in this world of rapid change and customers seeing that the companies are increasingly just focused on their internal operations and the efficiency of their operations, not paying attention to what the needs of the customer are, the customers tend to become much more short-term in their decision making. I'll go with whatever product or service I can find at the moment, but hey, better one comes along, I'm going with that. And so you get an increasing churn rate in customers. And that's very challenging for businesses that invest a lot of money to acquire customers in the first place. To lose them at an increasing rate can be very challenging. So I think that there's a big challenge, a lot of big challenges emerging from the big shift in terms of this scalable efficiency model. But I want to highlight one of the biggest challenges that I believe is really going to be very difficult to overcome, and that is the loss of access to data. In the scalable efficiency model, again, it's the focus on the internal operations, and that's leading to loss of trust. And the paradox is, at the same time, in the big shift world, we are seeing a massive explosion of data. And the leaders that I talk to largely make the assumption of, oh, the data is going to be there. There's an avalanche of data. We're just overwhelmed. We're not sure what to do with all of it, but it's there. It's waiting to be used. And I think that the assumption is that data is going to be available. The only question is, how do we use it? How do we become more efficient with it? And that's the question on the table. But I want to just push back a bit and suggest that actually we need to really pull back to a higher level. I have a framing of the business opportunities of the future. If you want to be successful, follow the money. Where is the money going to be generated? And if you want to follow the money, increasingly, I believe in a digital world, we need to follow the data. Whoever has access to and acquires data will generate the most revenue and income to their business. But further recommendation is, as you follow the data, follow trust. Because the question is, will that data be available to you? And my view is that over time, it will only be available if the providers of the data trust you. And increasingly, we're seeing evidence that in an eroding trust environment, customers are pulling back. The sale of digital tools that help prevent tracking of people online is a good indicator, early indicator of the effort of customers to hide the data that was previously freely available. And increasingly now there's pressure for government regulation to reduce the ability of companies to access data, privacy concerns. And I think, again, that all stems from this notion of lack of trust of how this data is going to be used. So If you want to follow the money, follow the data. And if you want to follow the data, follow the trust. The question is, where is there going to be trust? Because those will be the companies and institutions that have access to more and more data, and they're going to be the ones that will generate more and more revenue and impact in their particular institution. So, what's to be done? How do we address this? And I would suggest that the key question on the table in addressing the challenge and the opportunity here is, how do we rebuild trust with those who are providing the data that's so valuable to us? And when I talk about rebuilding trust, I find that most executives focus on things like data security and privacy. We need to have more rigorous security of our data so it can't be hacked. We need to have policies and procedures that will protect privacy and prevent third parties from accessing the data in unwarranted ways. And I don't want to dismiss that. That's absolutely important for trust. But I think it's a minimal threshold. I don't believe that's the reason that trust is eroding so rapidly in all of our institutions. It goes to a more fundamental perception on the part of those providing the data that the data is not being used for their benefit. It's being used for the benefit of the institution. And so trust erodes. Whose interests are you serving? You're not serving my interests. So it's a challenging situation. How do you rebuild trust? And I think it's a journey. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I do think it's feasible. It can be done. And my recommendation is to all institutions at this point is just start with the data that you already have of the people, customers or stakeholders that you're dealing with. Because most institutions have an enormous amount of data already in place that they've captured, that are sitting in data warehouses. And I think it's a challenge of being more proactive in searching through that data to say, where is there data here that I could use to provide more value back to those who provided me with the data in the first place? So it's not going out in massive collection of new data. It's starting with the data you already have, but asking that more fundamental question, which again, in my experience, scalable efficiency institutions don't ask, which is, how do we provide more and more value back to the customer? Not just use it for internal operational efficiency or more efficient targeting, marketing of customers. It's providing more value back to the customers that provided us with the data. And I think doing it in a very pragmatic way of starting with things that you can do very quickly, not a huge amount of analysis, not a huge amount of additional data collection, but that you can use to really start to show the customers that they're getting tangible value in return to for the data that they've already provided. I'll just give you one example. It's being done in certain places, but not very widespread. But automobile dealers, who are selling cars to customers. Increasingly now, we have customers that can provide you with a very rich profile of the driving patterns of that customer. Where did they go? How much travel did they do in a day? How many stops? How fast did they go? A lot of different dimensions of travel profiles that are already available in many cars. And I think one of the interesting things is, how could an automobile dealer use that data to be more proactive in recommending to customers the models of car that would be most appropriate given their driving habits and driving patterns? So again, being proactive and being clear that you're doing this based on you're seeing their driving patterns and why those driving patterns would make sense for this car. And by the way, be very careful that you're not just promoting the car with the highest margin, but you are promoting the cars that really match the driving patterns of that driver, of that customer. That will start to say, whoa, you're really helping me. This is great. I'm very grateful for that. I wasn't even thinking about that model of a car. And then I think there's a process of data exchange over time. As you start to rebuild trust based on taking data you already have and providing value back to the customer, now you can start to be a little more proactive in asking for some more data. And I would ask for it, ask for permission to access it, but be thoughtful about what's the data that you could access from the customer where you could really deliver more value back to that customer quickly, so that you get this process going of, I've provided some data as a customer, I'm getting some value back, this is really great. What more data can I provide you? So I think that's the opportunity here. And I think it will over time build more and more trust as you have that data exchange proceeding. And then, I mean, it goes further. You can use the data to really tailor the products and services to match the specific needs of that customer. And I won't go into great details, but an interesting early example of this was the GE appliances, which was originally part of General Electric. It was fairly recently sold to Haier, and it's completely changed the model of household appliances. They used to be, again, standardized mass market products, but increasingly they're focusing on how to modularize and tailor the product and service so that it can meet the needs of very specific customer segments, and quite successful as a result. And then there's an opportunity, again, not just for you as a company or as an institution to modify your approach to the customer, but it's how can you start to then mobilize a growing number of third parties so that you can provide more and more value to those customers, again, based on more insight into who that customer is, what their context is, what their real needs are, being proactive about saying, I don't need to do this all myself. I can find expertise and resources and capability and connect my customers and recommend to them certain providers because they have things that are really relevant to that specific customer's needs. So again, I think that's a big untapped opportunity. Early example of that, it's very early. There's a whole group of practitioners that are emerging called wellness coaches. They're helping customers, people who want to improve their wellness, not just wait for them to get sick and treat them, but improve their wellness. And those wellness coaches are harnessing a huge amount of data. They can capture in real time data of the people they're serving, the physical condition of the people, everything from heartbeat to breathing patterns. And then they're using that data, not just to provide advice back to the customer from themselves, but to connect those customers with a broader range of experts given the particular needs of a customer. So if the customer has more need for physical exercise, here's a set of expertise. Here's some providers we can connect you with. If the customer has nutritional issues, well, here's some nutritionists who can help. But it's creating this broader and broader network of expertise that could be mobilized and orchestrated to serve the very individual needs of a specific customer in real time. Big opportunity. So what are the benefits of all this? If we follow this pattern of trying to rebuild trust and providing tangible value back to the customer, I think that one of the key values or benefits here is that the companies or institutions that do this are going to get privileged access to the data of the customers they're serving, the stakeholders they're serving. And we're going to get this virtuous cycle in motion that I mentioned earlier, which is the more value I'm providing back to you as a customer or stakeholder, the more willing you're going to be to share data with me. I will have privileged access to the data because you're not going to provide it to just anyone. You're providing it to me because you've developed a deep trust of me. And based on that data, I can provide even more value to you, which deepens the trust and the willingness to share more data. And you get this, again, virtuous cycle kicking off, which is very exciting and has a lot of opportunity to it. Another benefit of this approach is it builds loyalty. I mean, if you're providing tangible value back to that customer, they see that based on knowing you, they're getting more and more value from the company. And so they're more willing to stay with the company, because the longer they stay, the more the company gets to know them, the more value that they'll get. So loyalty increases, that customer churn rate goes down. And this whole approach to adapting to the specific needs of individual customers builds more differentiation. We're no longer dealing with standardized mass market products where you just compare the price per unit of performance and that's your decision. No, there's differentiation. This product or this service has been very specifically designed for your needs. So it again helps to both improve your competitive situation. Competitors have a hard time matching that differentiation, and word of mouth spreads. Other people hear from their friends that this company is really providing an enormous amount of value to me. Maybe you should consider their product or service. So customer revenue expands as word of mouth spreads. And then just to add to it, another benefit of all this is leverage. I mentioned earlier this opportunity to use data to mobilize a growing number of third parties and orchestrate them to serve the needs of a customer. Well, more and more of the resources and the investment required for that is being provided by some third parties, not by you. You're capturing some of the value because you're playing the role of an orchestrator or connector. And so you will benefit enormously, but with much less investment required on your side. So that's a big opportunity. And then just to further increase the opportunity, there's an opportunity to learn faster. And in a rapidly changing world, learning faster becomes more and more critical to success. And so the opportunity to harness more and more data in real time, so you can learn about the context of the people you're serving, and more opportunity to work with third parties who have different sets of expertise and perspectives that can be brought to this data. You're all going to learn a lot faster and provide more and more value back to the people who are offering you the data in the first place. So again, big opportunity there to learn faster in a rapidly changing world. So I've talked a lot about the opportunity. Let me just pull back now to the challenge. This is not easy. If you've been following how I'm framing this, this is a fundamental shift in institutional models. I mentioned earlier that for over a century now, our institutions have been built around this model of scalable efficiency. My view, based on the work that I've done on the big shift and this issue of erosion of trust, is the institutional models that are going to succeed in the future are what I call scalable learning models, where the focus is on how do we help all the participants to learn faster, to provide more and more value at less cost to the customers and to the stakeholders. Very different model. It changes everything in how we operate, how we organize. All the activities in the company have to change. It's true transformation. And here I'll just say that I have a bit of skepticism. We've got this whole view of digital transformation. But when I push on digital transformation, broadly, they're just talking about applying digital technology in their institution to do what they've always done faster and cheaper. No, this is not doing what you've always done faster and cheaper. It's changing everything in how you operate your business, how you organize, and even defining what your business really is. So it is true transformation. It challenges really deeply held beliefs and practices of the leaders of the company, of the employees in the company, of everyone who's participating. Third parties, they all have to make a big shift in terms of the institutional model. And again, just to give a bit of flavor of the kinds of changes, I mean, one of the key things in a scalable learning model, institutional model, is creating environments where all the participants can improvise in the moment based on real-time flows of data that are providing them more insight into the rapidly changing context that they're serving. Improvisation, that's absolutely prohibited in a scalable efficiency world. It's all about tightly specified, highly standardized activities. Follow that and don't deviate. Huge change. And then this notion of expanding participants. Again, in a scalable efficiency world, the tendency is to want to do it all yourself. The best way to be efficient is to have complete control of all the resources to begin with. And relying on more and more third parties, diverse third parties, no, not part of our efficiency model. So there are a lot of changes at a very fundamental level that are challenging for those who've achieved success in the scalable efficiency world. Challenges deeply held beliefs and practices of everyone, again, at the leadership level, down at the employee level. And I think in that context, one of the things I advise is to really never, ever underestimate the power of the immune system and the antibodies that will mobilize at the slightest indication of change and mobilize to crush that change. So the question is, how do you deal with that immune system and antibodies if you see the need for fundamental change in institutional models? I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I've come to be a strong proponent of a very different model of change than most companies and institutions pursue. Most companies pursue a top-down, big bang approach. We're going to change everything. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a long time, but trust me, great things. No. The approach to change that I advocate is really driven by a very old book on strategy called The Art of War. And the key message in The Art of War was to delay as long as possible confrontation between the enemies and the champions. And so in the scaling edge model, the approach here is to find an area of the institution that's relatively marginal today, but has the potential to scale at a very rapid rate, given the kinds of rapid changes going on in the big shift, and where you could use that edge as it scales to demonstrate the power and impact of a very different approach to running the business or running the institution, and focus on scaling the edge. Now this, there are many things that are required for success in scaling the edge. One is you have to have a real commitment that this edge is going to become the new core of your business. It's not just an experiment, an innovation lab. No, this is going to be the new core. And it requires finding a leader, a senior leader in the institution, ideally the CEO, or at least somebody who reports to the CEO, who will have both the commitment and the courage to support that scaling edge initiative and insulate it from the immune system. And then just, again, I've ended up with about 12 different design principles for scaling edges, which you can access in my research reports. But I think one of the design principles is to starve the edge. It's a notion that the temptation is, if you think this is the future of your company, you want to pour a ton of money into it. Resist that temptation. Ask what's the minimum amount to get the maximum progress in a 6-month period of time, and that's all I'm going to provide. And it helps, first of all, to resist the likelihood of the immune system coming after you, because if you pour a lot of money into the edge, the immune system, I guarantee, is going to be running out to pull it back. So the less you have to put into the edge at the early days, the better you are. It also creates a sense of urgency on the edge leadership team and focuses the edge leadership team on building leverage from the start by connecting to third parties where they can leverage their own meager resources to have more impact. So I think that the challenge is big. There's no question that trying to drive fundamental change in a large institution is a very serious undertaking. And I think that, again, part of my optimism here is I do believe that this scaling the edge approach can help to drive change, even though there is a very powerful immune system and set of antibodies that will resist the change. And the notion of, in the context of rebuilding trust, I think that finding an edge where you can target a very specific set of customers and actually have data already available and start, again, that process of, through data exchange and value exchange, rebuilding the trust, will start to quickly show the value that can be created through this very different approach. But the key too in scaling the edge is to avoid cannibalizing the core. So you're not going to want to compete with the core for their products and services. You want to be additive and providing more and more value, either to existing customers or to a whole new customer segment that hasn't yet been addressed or served. So, big opportunity here, big challenge. I think, again, the model that we've all operated on of scalable efficiency, while hugely successful in the past, is becoming more and more challenged. And this notion of rebuilding trust so that you can get more privileged access to the data that's becoming more available at much less cost creates a very significant opportunity. That explosion of data is really a key factor in this big shift. One of the things in the big shift as a result of the digital technology infrastructures is we can get much richer real-time views of our context, not only our context, but the context of our customers and other stakeholders at much lower cost. It used to require an extraordinary amount of money to get that kind of data. It's becoming less and less expensive. But the challenge is, again, while it's less expensive, the issue is, do you have the trust where you'll get the permission to be able to access that data? And it creates unlimited potential for value delivery. If you shift your focus from efficiency, which is just cutting costs, to providing more and more value in a tailored way back to customers and other stakeholders, I guarantee you, as human beings, our value needs are endless. As soon as certain values are being addressed, we'll have other needs that surface. So the opportunity to provide more and more value over time becomes very significant. But the key here, and why this is really worth the effort to undertake, is getting privileged access to data. The companies and institutions that have privileged access to data are going to enjoy increasing returns. Returns on the data are going to expand at an exponential rate. And it will become a barrier to entry to other institutions, because if you have privileged access to data because of the trust you've built with customers, a new entrant is going to have a very hard time getting access to that same kind of data. It'll be more and more challenging. And so at the end of the day, I believe the opportunity here is to create exponentially expanding opportunity. If we can figure out how to rebuild trust and get privileged access to data, we're going to be able to create more and more value exponentially, far more quickly, and at far less cost than would have been imaginable decades ago. So huge opportunity, not to underestimate the challenge, but it's worth addressing the challenge because that opportunity is so big. I look forward to hearing about your journey. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.